Britain built more than 130,000 aircraft to win the Second World War. You can probably name 3. By 1945, the RAF was flying the only Allied jet fighter to see combat in that war, and its pilots were forbidden to cross the front line. Britain won the jet race, then handed the engine to the enemy. I will show you exactly how. 4 months inside Air Ministry records, squadron combat reports and production ledgers. In August 1940, around 750 serviceable fighters stood between the Luftwaffe and the end of the country. Fighter Command lost more than 500 aircrew in 16 weeks. Everyone knows the Spitfire saved Britain. But the Air Ministry's own tally credited Hurricane squadrons with more kills than every other British defence combined. The most famous aircraft of the war was not the one doing the work. In 1932, the future Prime Minister of Britain stood up in the House of Commons and told his country there was no defence. That no power on earth could stop you being bombed, and that the bomber would always get through. That wasn't a phrase, it was state policy. For 5 years, British money went to the bomber. Fighters were what you'd bought if you'd already lost. Then, in April 1935, an aircraft lifted off from Filton and appeared to prove him right. A press baron had paid for it, wanting the fastest civil aircraft in Europe. He called it Britain First. The Air Ministry timed it at 307 miles per hour, faster than any fighter the RAF had. A bomber had outrun the fighters built to shoot it down. The doctrine wasn't just correct, it was demonstrable. But the trouble with building the fastest aircraft of 1935 is that 1935 doesn't last. That design became the Bristol Blenheim, in service by 1937. By September 1939, the Messerschmitt Bf 109 was over 60 miles per hour faster and carried 20mm cannon. The unstoppable bomber was now a target. And what was defending British skies? A biplane. The Gloucester Gladiator entered service in February 1937. Fabric wings, 2 of them, and an enclosed cockpit. That was the innovation. 747 were built, and it was obsolete the day it arrived. Remember the factory. Gloucester. It comes back at the end of this story. On the 18th of December, 1939, the doctrine sat its exam. 24 Vickers Wellingtons crossed the North Sea in daylight to hit German warships in the Heligoland Bight. The theory said bombers in tight formation could defend themselves. The Germans had found the blind spot. They attacked from the beam where the Wellington had no guns. And its fuel tanks were not self-sealing. There was no rubber lining to close over a bullet hole the way a wound closes. One hit in the wing and the aircraft burned. 12 of the 22 that reached the target never came home. 56 men were killed. In a single afternoon, Bomber Command buried daylight bombing over Germany and moved to the night for the rest of the war. But the doctrine had not finished collecting. On the 12th of May, 1940, Flying Officer Donald Garland led 5 ferry battles off a grass field in France. Their target was 2 bridges over the Albert Canal that German tanks were pouring across. The order said they were to be destroyed at all costs. The crews drew lots for who would go. Garland was 21. His navigator, Sergeant Thomas Gray, was flying his first bombing sortie. 1 aircraft came back. Both men were awarded posthumous Victoria Crosses, the RAF's first of the war. Within hours, German engineers threw pontoon bridges across the canal, and the army came on anyway. Between the 10th and the 14th of May, The battles flew 118 sorties. 60 ended in destruction. 1 in 2. The bomber did not always get through, so everything now rested on the one part of British rearmament nobody had taken seriously: the fighters. One man had never believed Baldwin. Hugh Dowding argued that a fighter could intercept a bomber if you knew in advance where it was coming from. So he built a chain of coastal radar stations wired to an underground room where plotters pushed wooden counters across a vast map. Not an aircraft, a system. Without it, the two fighters you are about to meet would have hunted an empty sky. One of them is the most famous aircraft Britain ever built. The other one won the battle. The Hawker Hurricane was out of date the day it was born. Steel tube frame, rear fuselage covered in fabric. But that fabric was its secret weapon. A shredded Hurricane came home. A fitter stitched a patch over the hole, and it flew again that afternoon. A damaged Spitfire needed precision metal workers and a workshop. A Hurricane took around 10,000 man-hours to build. A Spitfire, 15,000. So, in August 1940, Fighter Command had 32 Hurricane squadrons and 19 Spitfire squadrons. And the Hurricane's 8 guns sat grouped close to the fuselage, a steady platform that could hold the trigger on a German bomber and not let go. Which brings us to the number almost nobody repeats. The Hurricane is credited with destroying more German aircraft in the Battle of Britain than every other British defense combined. Other fighters, anti-aircraft guns, everything else added together. Now the small print, because it matters. Kill claims were wildly inflated on both sides, and post-war cross-checking against German loss records cut many tallies in half. But the split holds. The weight of the fighting was carried by the aircraft made of cloth. So why do we remember the Spitfire? Partly because the Germans decided it. Luftwaffe pilots shot down over Kent almost always insisted it had been a Spitfire. Nobody wanted to have been beaten by a fabric aeroplane. And partly because the Spitfire was doing a different job. Hurricanes went for the bombers. Spitfires climbed to occupy the Bf-109s, escorting them. The Spitfire did not win the battle. It bought the time for the Hurricane to win it, and the squadron that claimed more aircraft than any other in the entire battle was not British. 303 Squadron was flown by Polish pilots whose country had already fallen. They flew Hurricanes, and the RAF had hesitated to let them fight at all. In 42 days, they claimed 126 German aircraft, a figure historians have revised down since, but which even revised has no rival. Dowding, who had doubted them, later wrote that without the Poles, he hesitated to say the outcome would have been the same. 544 Fighter Command aircrew did not come back. Britain had found its 2 fighters. But in the same sky, in the same weeks, the RAF sent up others. Some of them should never have left the ground. Somebody at the Air Ministry had an idea that sounded brilliant on paper. A fighter pilot must fly the aircraft and aim it at the same time. So why not split the jobs? A pilot who only flies. Behind him, in a rotating turret, a gunner who only shoots. 360 degrees of fire. That was the Boulton Paul Defiant. And it carried no forward-firing guns at all. Over Dunkirk in May 1940 it worked, because from behind, a Defiant looked like a Hurricane, and German pilots slid into its tail. Exactly where the turret was waiting. But a trick that depends on the enemy being confused only works once. On the 19th of July, 1940, 9 Defiants of 141 Squadron took off from Hawking on their first operational sortie. 10 Bf-109s intercepted them, attacking head-on and from below, the two angles the turret could not reach. 6 of the 9 went down in minutes, so the Defiant was pulled out of daylight combat. And here its story turns. Because at night, a slow aircraft with a turret that fires upward is exactly what you want. A Defiant slid underneath a German bomber, invisible against the black ground, and emptied the turret into its belly. Through the winter blitz, 4 Defiant squadrons shot down more German aircraft than any other British type. The worst fighter in the RAF became the best night fighter in Britain, without changing a single part. Not every mistake was that lucky. The Navy built the Blackburn Rock, slower than the bombers it was meant to catch. The Blackburn Skua was half dive bomber, half fighter, and good at neither. Though off Bergen in April 1940, Skuas sank the cruiser Königsberg, widely credited as the first major warship sunk by dive bombing. And the slow, heavy ferry Fulmer still claimed more kills than any other Fleet Air Arm fighter, because it was there when nothing else was. Then there was the one that really was brilliant. The Westland Whirlwind was the RAF's first single-seat twin-engine fighter. 4 20mm cannon grouped in the nose, twice a Spitfire's firepower, concentrated in one point. Below 15,000 feet, it was faster than a Spitfire, but it ran on Rolls-Royce Peregrines, and in 1940, Rolls-Royce had to choose. Peregrines for a niche aircraft, or Merlins for every Spitfire and Hurricane the country was desperate for. They chose the Merlin. So the Whirlwind died, not in combat, but in a meeting. Just over 100 were built. When one was lost, there was no engine to replace it. Meanwhile, the Luftwaffe had stopped coming by day, which left Britain a new problem: finding a bomber in a black sky 3 miles up without seeing it. The answer was to put a radar inside the aircraft. The first kill guided by airborne radar went to a Blenheim in July 1940. But the aircraft that turned the night into British territory was the Bristol Beaufighter, 4 cannon in its belly and room in the nose for the aerial and for a second man whose only job was to stare at a green screen. Its most famous pilot was John Cunningham, 20 kills, 19 of them at night. The government could not explain how, without admitting it had radar in the air, so it told the press he ate enormous quantities of carrots and nicknamed him Cat's Eyes. Most historians doubt the Germans believed it for a moment. They had radar of their own. The carrot lie fooled everybody else. It still does. But while the RAF was solving the night, the most antiquated weapon in the entire British arsenal was about to do something nobody saw coming. It had no enclosed cockpit, no retractable undercarriage, not even a wing. It had 2. The Fairy Swordfish. First flew in 1934. Fabric wings, fixed undercarriage, an open cockpit. Top speed about 140 miles an hour, slower than some bombers of the First World War. Its crews called it the string bag. Not for how it looked, but because, like the string shopping bag a housewife took to market, it carried absolutely anything. Torpedoes, mines, depth charges, rockets, a radar set. On the night of the 11th of November 1940, 21 of those biplanes took off from the carrier Illustrious, heading for Taranto. The Italian battle fleet lay at anchor there, behind more than 100 anti-aircraft guns, barrage balloons, and torpedo nets. Italian engineers had calculated the water was too shallow for an air-drop torpedo. It would bury itself in the mud before it armed. The British modified the torpedoes. The Swordfish came in 30 feet above the water, threading between balloon cables. The Italians fired 14,000 shells. In 90 minutes, 3 Italian battleships were out of the war. Conte di Cavour never sailed again. Cost: 2 aircraft. A single airstrike had done what no surface fleet in history had managed: destroyed a battle fleet inside its own harbor. Weeks later, the Japanese naval attaché in Europe turned up at Taranto to take notes. 13 months after that, his notes woke up over Pearl Harbor. But the Swordfish wasn't finished. On the 24th of May, 1941, the German battleship Bismarck broke HMS Hood in half. 1,415 men died. 3 survived. Then the Bismarck vanished into the Atlantic, and when the Royal Navy found her, she was faster than almost everything chasing her. If she reached the French coast, she was safe. On the evening of the 26th of May, 15 Swordfish took off from Ark Royal into an Atlantic gale. They scored 2 hits. One did almost nothing. The other struck the stern and jammed Bismarck's rudder 15 degrees to port. The most powerful warship in the world began steering in circles. 13 hours later, she was on the seabed. Why didn't the flak stop them? The explanation the sources repeat is hard to believe. The Swordfish flew so slowly that German fire control predictors, calibrated for modern aircraft, aimed too far ahead. The aircraft was saved by being obsolete. That luck ran out on 12th of February 1942, when Scharnhorst and Gneisenau ran up the English Channel in daylight. Lieutenant Commander Eugene Esmond led 6 Swordfish against them, knowing what was waiting. All 6 were shot down. Of 18 aircrew, 5 survived. Not 1 torpedo hit. Esmond received a posthumous Victoria Cross, and still it kept flying. It outlasted the war, and it outlasted its own replacement. The Fairey Albacore, modern and enclosed, was withdrawn from service before the biplane it came to retire. Because the Swordfish had found the war, it could actually fight. Atlantic. With radar under one wing and depth charges under the other, flying from tiny carriers built on merchant hulls, it hunted U-boats in the mid-ocean gap no land-based aircraft could reach. It wasn't alone. The short Sunderland was a flying boat so bristling with guns that German pilots called it the Flying Porcupine. The Bristol Beaufort carried the torpedo to German shipping. The Fairey Barracuda left the battleship Tirpitz crippled in a Norwegian fjord in 1944. And for convoys with no carrier at all, Britain bolted a Hurricane to a catapult on a cargo ship. The pilot was fired into the air by rocket, and there was no deck to come back to. When his fuel ran out, he took to his parachute over the North Atlantic and waited for a ship to find him. If one did. That was the price of holding the sea. But 3 miles over Germany, Britain was building something else entirely. And its first attempt failed so badly that almost nobody remembers its name. To bomb Germany at night, you need an aircraft that carries tons, not hundreds of pounds. Britain ordered 3. All 3 went wrong. The short Stirling flew first, but the Air Ministry capped its wingspan at 100 feet, and a short wing means less lift high up. So the Stirling struggled past 16,000 feet, while the bombers alongside it flew far higher. German gunners did not have to aim. The Stirling was always underneath. The Handley Page Halifax was better, more than 6,000 built, carrying an enormous share of the night campaign. But the aircraft that matters here is the third one, the one nobody remembers. The Avro Lancaster had 2 Rolls-Royce Vultures, 24 cylinders in an X, brilliant on paper. In the air they overheated, broke and caught fire. and when a Manchester lost one engine, the other had to double its work and often burned too. 202 were built. More were lost to their own engines than to the enemy. In 18 months, it was gone. But Avro's chief designer, Roy Chadwick, looked at the wreck and saw something else. The airframe was not the problem. The airframe was superb. So he stretched the wing from 80 feet to 102 feet, threw both vultures away, and hung 4 Merlins on it, the engine of the Spitfire and the Hurricane. The engine Britain trusted. It flew in January 1941, and the RAF's most forgotten failure became the Avro Lancaster. Its bomb bay was a smooth tunnel 33 feet long. No other Allied bomber had anything like it. It could swallow what nobody else could carry, like a cylindrical bomb that bounced across water. On the night of 16 May 1943, 19 Lancasters of 617 Squadron flew over the Ruhr at 60 feet in the dark to break the German dams with Barnes-Wallis's invention. They breached 2 of them. 8 of the 19 did not come home. Of 133 aircrew, 53 were killed. And here is the part the legend skips. The Germans repaired the dams within months, and roughly 1,600 people died in the flood, more than 1,000 of them prisoners of war and forced laborers. The industrial damage was arguable. The propaganda blow was immense. Both things are true at once. That is how this war works. What 617 Squadron did change was precision bombing. With the 5-ton Tallboy and the 10-ton Grand Slam, the heaviest conventional bomb of the war, which no other Allied aircraft could lift, they hit what ordinary bombing could not touch. In November 1944, they sank the Tirpitz. 7,377 Lancasters were built. 3,249 were lost on operations. And between 1939 and 1945, Bomber Command lost 55,573 men. Not aircraft. Men. A 19-year-old in a rear turret, in the dark, at 30 below, was told to complete 30 missions. Now set that against what an aircraft made of wood did. When de Havilland proposed a bomber built from plywood and balsa with no turrets, no gunners, and not one defensive machine gun, the Air Ministry thought it was ridiculous. A bomber without defenses was a dead bomber. Everybody knew that. But de Havilland had an argument. Strip out the turrets, the gunners, the ammunition and the armor, and the aircraft weighs half as much. At half the weight, on 2 Merlins, it is faster than the fighters coming to kill it. Its defense wasn't gunfire, it was speed. Tested against a Spitfire in 1941, the Spitfire couldn't stay with it. The de Havilland Mosquito did everything: bomber, night fighter, photo reconnaissance, pathfinder. And carrying no defensive gun at all, it finished the war with the lowest loss rate of any aircraft in Bomber Command. The RAF's own post-war analysis went further. Measured in useful damage done per unit of cost, the Mosquito came out almost 5 times more efficient than the Lancaster. The aircraft they nearly rejected as absurd. Lower down, the war was fought in the mud. The Hawker Typhoon was born as a fighter and failed. Its engine broke, and early aircraft shed their tails in flight. So they repurposed it. 4 cannon, rockets, down low over Normandy. Pilots claimed hundreds of German tanks destroyed. Post-war research found those figures heavily inflated, but also that the real effect was psychological. German crews abandoned their vehicles when they heard typhoons coming. Its big brother, the Hawker Tempest, became Britain's finest hunter of V-1 flying bombs. The Westland Lysander dropped SOE agents into French meadows lit by 3 torches and was gone in under 3 minutes. And on the morning of D-Day, the wooden gliders, the airspeed Horser and the Hamilcar, big enough to carry a light tank, cast off in silence over Normandy and landed yards from their targets. No engine, no second attempt. By then, Britain had built an aircraft for every war it could imagine. Except one. And that one had been sitting in a hangar since 1941, forbidden to fly over enemy territory. In 1930, a young Royal Air Force officer named Frank Whittle patented an idea. An engine that turned no propeller but swallowed air, squeezed it, burned it, and threw it out of the back. The Air Ministry read it and decided it was not worth funding. Whittle started his own company with private money. On the 15th of May 1941 at Cranwell, a small aircraft with no propeller took off for the first time. The Gloucester E-2839, built by Gloucester, the same factory that made the Gladiator, the Royal Air Force's last biplane, and flown by the same test pilot, Jerry Sayer. The man who flew Britain's last biplane also flew its first jet. 7 years apart. From it came the Gloucester Meteor, in service by July 1944 with 616 Squadron, the only Allied jet fighter to see combat in the whole war. Its first mission was not against the Luftwaffe. It was against the V-1 flying bombs falling on London. On the 4th of August 1944, a Meteor pilot's cannon jammed as he chased one down, so he pulled alongside, slid his wingtip under the bomb's wing, and tipped it over. But the Meteor was forbidden to cross the enemy coast. No Meteor was to come down in German territory, where the enemy could learn from it. So the only Allied jet fighter of the war spent months patrolling the sky above its own house. And here's the part almost nobody knows. The Meteor and the Messerschmitt, Me-262, the only 2 jet fighters that fought in that war, never met. Not once. The first jet versus jet battle in history had to wait for another war on another continent. Korea. And when it came, the enemy was flying a British engine. In 1946, Britain was bankrupt, and anyone paying in gold was a customer. The Soviets asked to buy the Rolls-Royce Nene, the best jet engine in the world at that moment. The British government said yes, on one condition: that it not be used for military purposes. When Stalin was told they had agreed, he reportedly did not believe it. The line attributed to him, "What fool will sell us his secrets?" Dozens of engines went to Moscow. The Soviets took them apart piece by piece, copied them as the Klimov RD-45, and bolted the result into the nose of a swept-wing fighter called the MiG-15. 4 years later, over Korea, that MiG-15 was shooting down American bombers, and it comfortably outclassed the Gloucester Meteor, the aircraft Britain had given birth to. Now the whole truth, because it matters. Rolls-Royce regarded the Nene as yesterday's technology. The Soviets were already building an engine of their own, and the Nene was not even on the secret list. They would probably have got there anyway later. But the fact is the fact. Britain invented the jet engine. It flew the only Allied jet of the war and would not let it cross the front line. It built the de Havilland Vampire too late to fight. Then it cancelled the Miles M52, the aircraft meant to break the sound barrier, handing its research to the Americans, who flew the X-1 soon after. The country that won the jet race never ran the next one. And that race began with the aircraft this country sent out to DI in 1940 because they were all it had. 131,549 aircraft, a fabric biplane that doomed the Bismarck, a wooden bomber with no guns, 55,573 men of bomber command who never came back. And not everything that flew for the RAF was British. Without the Mustangs, the Liberators, and the Dakotas that crossed the Atlantic, this story ends differently. That's another story. Because there was a moment in 1940 when the sky over Kent filled with German aircraft that were, almost all of them, better than the ones climbing to meet them. Those German aircraft had names too, and a history, and an ending. The next one is waiting, top right.